Hey, this is Shane Long, wedding and portrait photographer here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and today I want to do a review of a lens that I've been using the last 2.5 years. It's one of my favorites, the Canon EF 85mm f1.4 IS. This is the ultimate portrait lens. I'm going to show you some sample images that I've made with it, give you some sample videos, and then wrap it up with my final verdict. Here we go. Let's start by talking about build quality. This lens is constructed like a tank. It features a metal barrel with dust and water sealings. All focusing is done internally. The lens cups perfectly in my hand and balances very well with the 5D Mark IV. It's almost like the two were made for each other. The switches have a great click to them, but my one gripe with the lens has been that they click too easy. Often I pull the lens out of my bag and put it on my camera only to find out later that the image stabilization had been turned off. Here's another funny thing, it will make this rattling sound if you take your lens off before the image stabilization has it disabled. What you want to do is simply reattach it to your camera and the image stabilization should disengage and no longer make that rattling noise. When the image stabilizer kicks in, it sounds like this. And this is what the autofocus sounds like. In actual use, you barely hear the AF or the image stabilization. For those of you shooting on the EOS R system, here's how it looks with the control ring adapter. Using the Camera Connect app and the other camera mounted on a tripod, I use the face and eye detection to take some sample photos and videos here for you. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some portraits I made using the tripod. In this first picture, I want you to look at how obliterated that background is using the 1.4 aperture. My eyes are in focus, and the image still has contrast and sharpness, and yet the background is completely blurred. In these two images, I want to compare the difference between shooting at f1.4 and shooting at f5.6. So look at just the diameter here of the bokeh circles in the 1.4 image compared to the bokeh circles of the 5.6. If you're on a kit lens, like an 18 to 55, this is the amount of background blur you'd be able to get. Here's what you get with a 1.4 lens. That said, you'll also notice how much more of my face is in focus in this image on the 5.6. Almost from my ears to my nose is all in focus. On this one, really just my eyes are in focus. To show that shallow depth of field, I turned sideways so that you could see the camera focused on this eyeball, leaving this one out of focus. Some people don't mind that, some people do mind that. You just have to be aware that when you shoot at 1.4, you're gonna have a very shallow depth of field, but you are gonna get a very, very blurry background and the subject is just gonna be isolated by themselves. If you step back far enough, the lens is also great for full body portraits. Here it is at f5.6 and here it is at f1.4. And you can really just tell the difference between 5.6 to 1.4. 5.6, 1.4. 5.6, this is 1.4. If we zoom in focus from head to the phone, also still in focus from head to the phone, not quite as sharp. You don't see quite as much detail in my, my jacket there, but it's still very, very sharp, and especially when you're backed out, you can't really tell. If you did a print, you wouldn't see that much difference in the detail, and yet you'd still have this almost beautiful, surreal kind of feel to it. One thing to note, as with most lenses, the lens will wash out if it's in direct sunlight. To avoid this, try using the hood. Try looking for a shadow from a tree or a nearby object that you can shoot with, but know that if the sun is hitting the front element of your lens, you will get this washed out kind of look. The 85mm lens is the renowned focal length for doing portraits. Body proportions are perfectly rendered and the background just beautifully fades away. I've owned Canon's 85mm f1.8, their 1.2, the Sigma Art lens, and now this 85mm f1.4 IS. Each of them had things I didn't really care for. The 1.8 was too soft and had too much purple fringing. The 1.2 had autofocus that was really too slow, and the images were too soft for me. The Sigma Art had great contrast, it had great sharpness, but it was too large. So when Canon announced this 85 1.4 with image stabilization, I pre-ordered it the night it became available. I want to quickly walk you through how I use this lens on a wedding day. The first situation I usually use it in is during the first look. It allows me to be backed far enough that I can give them their chance to have genuine, natural emotion while still capturing the moment in an artistic and beautiful way. Right after the first look, I usually give them a chance to connect and have a moment alone together. Then I try to quickly move in and make a beautiful standard portrait, something that they're proud of to put on their wall or that mom or grandma wants to put on the wall as well. The lens has a beautiful, almost magical feel to it. Now in this photo, I combined multiple frames and stitched it as a panorama to get a super blurry background. But in this portrait, I just shot it at its widest aperture and it still has a magical feel to it. Because the lens is not only sharp in the center of the photo, but also near the edge, I will frequently shoot at f1.4 as long as my subjects are all in the same focal plane, so I shot it at f1.4 to get that magical feel to it. I shoot with two cameras on me at all time, and I usually leave an 85 on for much of the day because it allows me to get candid moments and fun moments very easily without being too close to ruin the moment. One thing to note is the bokeh highlights, so it does get a slight clipping if you're using it on a DSLR. It's not as bad or noticeable as it is with the 85mm f1.2, but it is still there. When I put this lens on my EOS R, that becomes resolved because it doesn't have a mirror box, so the bokeh near the edge of the photo won't become clipped. Here it is stopped down to f2. You can see that the highlights are still very beautiful. They're a little bit more rounded out. There's a slight clipping to them, but not much. The couple is razor sharp, and yet the foreground and the background are beautifully rendered. In addition to using it to capture the classic standard portrait, I'll also use it when the bride walks down the aisle, and then I'll use it once they do their exchange with the dad, and then the bride and groom are standing there, just to capture some beautifully rendered, candid kind of moments. Another way I use the lens is to capture the reception halls. I love the way the details just pop out of the photos with the slightly compressed look of the 85mm and the low aperture of 1.4. With its wide aperture, image stabilization, and fast autofocus, the lens is perfect for first dances. And because of those same features, it's my go-to lens for speeches. I'm using it more and more on engagement sessions. For a long time, I shot with a 35 and a 50, but now I'm leaning towards using more a 50 and this 85, just because it creates such a romantic look. Now here's a couple images I made with the 85 1.2 back in 2016. This is the lens flare that I would get with the 85 1.2. You don't get that with the 85 1.4 IS, and that's okay. It's not really my style anymore just because it does wash out the image. But for those of you that love lens flare, this 85 1.4 IS will not have this as beautiful of ring kind of highlights to it. So keep that in mind if that's important to you. And lastly, it's absolutely my favorite lens for senior portrait sessions. It creates sharp, contrasty, timeless images that I know they will cherish for a lifetime. This has been my favorite 85mm lens of all time. Image stabilization, fast autofocus, perfect color and contrast while being razor sharp. As a wedding and portrait photographer, it's everything that I need. If that's what you do and you're on a Canon DSLR, you need to check it out. That said, for me, I'm switching over to Canon's mirrorless system, and I can't wait to try out their new RF 85mm 1.2. If this review helped you, please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. We have a lot more videos to come. We'll see you next time.